For 3 years now, people walked past Robert as if he wasn't there. Once upon a time, he had been someone important, a talented architect with his name on building plans across the city. But life had other ideas. First came the divorce that drained his savings. Then his mother got sick with cancer. The treatments cost a fortune. When the economy crashed, Robert lost his job, then his apartment, and finally his hope. Now at 47, he sat on the cold pavement outside Horizon Tower every morning. His beard had grown wild. His clothes were worn thin, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much of life's harder side. The gleaming glass building housed some of the richest companies in the world, tech startups where young millionaires made billions with a few keystrokes, and investment firms that moved money around like it was nothing more than numbers on a screen. Most mornings, Robert would find scraps of paper from nearby trash cans. He'd smooth them out carefully and pull a stubby pencil from his coat pocket. Drawing buildings was the one thing from his old life he couldn't let go. When he sketched, he wasn't homeless anymore. He was an architect again, creating spaces where people could live and work and dream. People rushed past him every day, their eyes sliding away from his like oil on water. No one wanted to see him. It was easier to pretend he wasn't there. This reminder that sometimes life can take everything away no matter how carefully you've planned. A crisp October morning brought a chill to the air. Robert had slept poorly at the shelter, kept awake by a man crying in his sleep. He settled into his usual spot, leaning against the concrete planter outside Horizon Tower. From his backpack, containing everything he owned in the world, he pulled out his latest drawing. It wasn't just any building design. For months now, he'd been working on something special, a revolutionary housing concept that had been forming in his mind ever since he'd lost his own home. His design solved problems that million-dollar architectural firms hadn't cracked. It used simple materials in brilliant ways. It could be built quickly and cheaply but would last for decades. Most importantly, it would give people who had nothing a chance at having something. As Robert worked on refining a detail of the solar panel integration, the glass doors of Horizon Tower swung open. Out walked 5 young executives laughing loudly, riding high on some business success. "Another $100 million in the bank," said one, adjusting his designer sunglasses against the morning sun. "My new yacht can't come fast enough," replied another, a woman in a sharp suit that probably cost more than Robert had once made in a month. Leading the pack was Tyler Richardson, whose father had built a tech empire and handed his son the keys to the kingdom. At 32, Tyler was now CEO of Vision Tech, despite having none of his father's business sense or humanity. What he did have was arrogance, polished to a high shine by privilege and power. Tyler's eyes landed on Robert, and his perfect white smile twisted into something ugly. "Well, look who's still here," Tyler said, nudging his friends. "Our resident street artist." The group turned to look at Robert, who hunched his shoulders and tried to make himself smaller. He knew what was coming. It wasn't the first time. "Designing your dream cardboard box?" Tyler asked, his voice dripping with mock interest. "Or maybe a bridge underpass mansion?" His friends snickered on cue. Robert said nothing, keeping his eyes on his drawing. He'd learned that engaging only made things worse. "Seriously, though," Tyler continued, stepping closer, "what's a bum doing playing architect? Shouldn't you be, I don't know, finding a job or something?" One of Tyler's friends, a man with slicked back hair, joined in. "Maybe he can design us a state-of-the-art shopping cart. Top-of-the-line homeless technology." Their laughter cut through the morning air like glass. A few passers-by glanced over but quickly looked away, unwilling to get involved. Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out some coins. With a theatrical gesture, he tossed them toward Robert. They scattered across the sidewalk, one rolling into a drain. "There's your commission, architect," Tyler said. "Don't spend it all on blueprints." As the group walked away, still laughing, Robert slowly collected the coins. 67 cents. Not enough for a cup of coffee, but he couldn't afford to leave money behind. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. What Tyler and his friends hadn't bothered to look at was Robert's actual drawing. They hadn't seen the ingenious water collection system integrated into the roof design. They hadn't noticed the modular construction approach that would cut building time in half. They hadn't recognized that the homeless man they mocked had solved housing problems that billion-dollar companies claimed were unsolvable. Robert carefully folded his drawing and tucked it back into his backpack. Some days the mockery was harder to take than others. Today was one of those days. He thought about moving to another spot, but where would he go? The public library would let him sit inside until closing time, but the security guard had been giving him hard looks lately. The park had benches, but it would be too cold once the sun went down, so he stayed, watching as the city moved around him in its relentless rhythm. Business people rushing to important meetings, delivery drivers dropping off lunches that cost more than Robert had to live on for a week, tourists taking selfies in front of the impressive buildings not unlike ones he had once helped create. Around noon, the door to the coffee shop next to Horizon Tower opened, and out walked an older woman in a baker's apron. She looked around, spotted Robert, and walked over with purpose in her step. "They threw out perfectly good sandwiches again," she said quietly, handing him a paper bag. "I wrapped them up before they hit the trash. There's a cookie in there, too." Robert took the bag with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Lynn," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Mrs. Lynn had been slipping him food for months now. She never made a big deal about it, never asked questions, just treated him like a human being, something that had become rare in Robert's life. "Cold tonight," she commented, looking at the sky. "You have somewhere to go?" "The shelter on Pine Street," Robert said. "If I get there early enough to get a bed." She nodded, her eyes sad but kind. "You be careful." Then she was gone, back to her work, back to her life, a life with walls and a roof and purpose. Robert opened the bag. 2 sandwiches, slightly squashed but perfectly edible, and a chocolate chip cookie as big as his palm. He ate slowly, making the food last, watching people hurry by. How strange it was to become invisible. He remembered when he used to walk these same streets in a good suit, with a briefcase full of building plans, and people would meet his eyes, hold doors open, treat him like he mattered. After eating, Robert pulled out his drawings again. He lost himself in the clean lines and precise angles, in the problems that needed solving, in the one place where he still had control and purpose. On paper, he could still build worlds. As the afternoon light began to fade, Robert packed up his few belongings. He needed to get to the shelter soon if he wanted a bed for the night. Tomorrow would be another day of being unseen, another day of holding on to the last pieces of his former self. Another day of watching the Tyler Richardsons of the world toss coins at his feet, without ever seeing what was right in front of them. What Robert didn't know was that tomorrow wouldn't be just another day. Tomorrow someone would actually see him, really see him for the first time in years, and that would change everything. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly. Robert huddled under the narrow overhang of Horizon Tower, trying to keep his drawings dry. He'd spent half the night at the shelter working on his designs by the dim bathroom light after everyone else had gone to sleep. The shelter manager had found him there around 2 a.m., but, seeing the intensity in Robert's eyes, had simply sighed and left him be. The rain kept most people hurrying past with umbrellas and raincoats pulled tight. Few even glanced his way. Robert was grateful for the relative peace, though the dampness made his joints ache. At 47, sleeping on thin shelter mattresses or sometimes park benches had aged his body beyond its years. Around 10 o'clock, the rain turned from a drizzle to a proper downpour. Robert carefully tucked his drawings into a plastic grocery bag he kept for such occasions, and pulled his tattered jacket tighter. He was debating whether to try the public library, where he'd be dry but might get kicked out for looking homeless, when the doors of Horizon Tower swung open. A woman burst out, walking so fast she was nearly running. Her face was tight with frustration, and she clutched a leather portfolio to her chest like armor. She didn't have an umbrella, and within seconds her neat bun was coming undone in the rain, dark strands of hair plastering to her face. Instead of rushing to a waiting car or hurrying down the street like most people leaving the tower, she stopped abruptly, closed her eyes, and tilted her face up to the rain. Robert watched, puzzled, as she stood there letting herself get soaked, breathing deeply as if trying to calm a storm inside that matched the one outside. After a moment, she opened her eyes, noticed a bench nearby, one of those decorative ones that looked nice but weren't actually comfortable, and sat down heavily. She didn't seem to care that the seat was wet or that rain was ruining what looked like an expensive suit. Something about her despair seemed familiar to Robert. He recognized the look of someone whose professional world had just collapsed. He'd worn that same expression the day his architecture firm had let him go. The woman opened her portfolio and flipped through pages of diagrams and sketches with angry movements. Unrealistic, she muttered to herself. Too expensive. Not innovative enough. As if they'd no innovation if it bit them on their gold-plated. She broke off, noticing Robert watching her. For a moment, he expected the usual reaction. Averted eyes, tightened grip on her belongings, maybe a nervous glance for security. Instead, she gave him a rueful smile. Sorry, she said. Bad meeting. Robert nodded, surprised to be acknowledged. Looks like it, he replied, his voice rusty from disuse. The woman sighed, closing her portfolio as the rain began to soak through it. 2 years of work shot down in 20 minutes by people who think the housing crisis can be solved without actually spending any money. She laughed bitterly. I should have known better than to think billionaires would care about affordable housing beyond the tax breaks. Robert felt a spark of interest. Housing design was exactly what he'd been working on. Urban development? He asked. The woman looked at him with mild surprise, perhaps not expecting a homeless man to know the term. Yes, I'm Linda Chen, Urban Development Specialist. Well, was. After today's disaster, who knows? She didn't extend her hand to shake, but the fact that she gave her name at all was more courtesy than Robert usually received. Robert, he said simply. I used to be an architect. Linda's eyebrows rose. Really? What kind of buildings? Mixed-use developments, mainly. Some residential. I worked on the Westfield Commons project before it all went downhill. Her eyes widened with recognition. Westfield Commons? That's brilliant work. The way the community spaces integrate with private areas. She trailed off, giving him a closer look. Wait, you actually worked on that? Robert nodded, a flicker of his old professional pride warming his chest. I led the residential design team, but that was another life. The rain was easing up, turning back to a drizzle. Linda glanced back at Horizon Tower with distaste. I just got laughed out of a meeting with the Innovation Housing Coalition. Bunch of tech billionaires and real estate moguls pretending to care about solving the housing crisis while protecting their bottom line. She shook her head. They said my designs were uninspired and my cost projections unrealistic. Like any of them has ever had to think about building something that regular people could actually afford to live in. Robert hesitated, then reached for his plastic bag. I've been working on something, he said. Probably nothing, but I've had a lot of time to think about housing problems. Curiosity flickered across Linda's face. She watched as Robert carefully pulled out his drawings, protecting them from the drizzle with his body. It started as just a way to keep my mind sharp, he explained, unfolding the papers. But then I started really thinking about what makes housing so expensive and how to solve it. He laid the top drawing on the bench between them. It was a detailed schematic of a modular housing unit with annotations covering the margins. Linda leaned forward, her frustration momentarily forgotten. Her eyes widened as she took in the details of the design. This is interesting, she said, professional interest overriding any initial skepticism. You've integrated the utilities in a way I've never seen before. It cuts installation time by 60%, Robert explained. And those wall sections use a new composite material. Cheaper than traditional materials, but better insulation and longer lasting. Linda picked up the drawing for a closer look. Rain forgotten. And this roof system? Collects rainwater and channels it for reuse. The angle maximizes solar panel efficiency in northern climates. The whole thing can be built with minimal skilled labor, but exceeds current safety codes by 40%. Linda flipped through the other drawings, her expression changing from interest to astonishment. These cost projections, she murmured. Are they accurate? Robert nodded. I've been refining them for 3 years. The materials exist, the techniques are proven. It's just, no one's put them together this way before. She looked up at him, really seeing him now. Not a homeless man, not a charity case, but an architect, a colleague. These are revolutionary, she said simply. The very things those stuffed shirts upstairs just told me were impossible. Robert smiled faintly. That's the irony of being invisible. You get to hear all sorts of things people claim can't be done, while you're quietly figuring out how to do them. Linda stared at the drawings for a long moment, then at Robert. A plan was forming behind her eyes. The chief obstacle those jerks upstairs threw at me was cost. They said no one could build quality affordable housing at the price point needed to make it both accessible and profitable. She tapped the drawings. But according to these numbers, you've solved that exact problem. In theory, Robert cautioned. It's never been built. But it could be, Linda said, excitement growing in her voice. And I know exactly who needs to see this. She paused, studying him. Would you be willing to present these ideas? To people who could actually make them happen? Robert laughed, a short, harsh sound. He gestured to his ragged clothes, his unwashed hair. Look at me. Who would listen? Linda's expression hardened with determination. They'll listen because your ideas are brilliant. And because I'll make them listen. She stood up, clutching his drawings carefully. Give me 2 days. I can set up a meeting with Harold Wells. Robert's eyes widened. Even living on the streets, he knew that name. Harold Wells was the city's biggest developer, a billionaire known for taking chances on unconventional projects. He won't see me, Robert said. He'll see the architect who designed this, Linda replied, holding up the drawings. I won't tell him about your current situation beforehand. Once he sees these designs, it won't matter. Robert wanted to believe her, but hope was a dangerous thing when you lived on the streets. Hope could break you faster than cold or hunger. Why would you help me? He asked. Linda looked at the Horizon Tower, then back at Robert. Because those men up there just told me that what you've designed is impossible. Because they laughed at me for suggesting we could solve problems they profit from keeping unsolved. Her smile turned determined. And because I'd give anything to see the looks on their faces when they realized they laughed at the wrong person. She held out her hand. 2 days. I'll bring you clothes, get you cleaned up. We'll present together. Robert stared at her outstretched hand, hovering between his past and potentially his future. After 3 years of being unseen, someone was finally seeing him, not just as a person, but as a professional with something valuable to offer. He reached out and took her hand. 2 days, he agreed, sealing a pact that would soon shake the foundations of an industry as solidly as any earthquake. What neither of them knew was that Tyler Richardson, the same man who had mocked Robert just the day before, sat on Harold Wells's board of directors. And the meeting Linda was about to arrange would bring them face to face in a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. 2 days felt like 2 years to Robert. After Linda left with his precious drawings, copies she'd promised, not the originals, he'd spent the night at the shelter in a state of nervous excitement he hadn't felt in years. The next day, true to her word, Linda had found him again outside Horizon Tower. It's set, she'd told him, eyes bright with triumph. Harold Wells himself, plus his executive team and major investors. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. She'd handed him a business card for a small hotel nearby. Room 412, be there at 10 a.m. I've got everything arranged, clothes, haircut, the works. Now standing outside the gleaming glass doors of Wells Development Group headquarters, Robert barely recognized himself in the reflection. His wild beard was gone, replaced by a neat professional trim. His hair, washed and cut, was back to its natural brown with distinguished touches of gray at the temples. The suit Linda had brought fit him surprisingly well, navy blue, conservative but modern. Ready? Linda asked beside him, looking sharp herself in a charcoal pantsuit. Robert took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. The lobby was all marble and glass, designed to impress and intimidate. The receptionist gave them visitor badges without a second glance. No one who looked like Robert did now would ever be questioned in a place like this. As the elevator climbed to the 40th floor, Robert's mouth went dry. What if they hate it? What if they think it's all nonsense? Linda's eyes were steady. They won't. Your designs are brilliant. Just explain them exactly like you explained them to me. The elevator doors opened directly into a reception area for the executive suite. Another desk, another polished receptionist who directed them to a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Mr. Wells will join you shortly, the receptionist said. The others are already inside. Linda squeezed Robert's arm encouragingly before they entered. The conference room held a massive oval table where several people in expensive suits were already seated, chatting among themselves. Robert recognized a few faces from business magazines he used to read. Venture capitalists, tech company CEOs, real estate moguls. When Robert and Linda entered, the conversations died down. A large man with a shock of white hair rose from the head of the table. Linda Chen, he said warmly, extending his hand. Good to see you again. And this must be the architect you've been raving about. Harold Wells, Linda confirmed for Robert's benefit. Harold, this is Robert Davis, the architectural genius I told you about. Wells shook Robert's hand firmly. Linda says you've cracked the affordable housing code. I'm skeptical but intrigued. We've had a dozen teams working on similar problems for years. I've had a different perspective, Robert said carefully. Wells nodded, gesturing for them to take seats. Sometimes that's exactly what's needed. Fresh eyes. Robert was arranging his materials when the door opened again. His heart nearly stopped. Tyler Richardson walked in, followed by two of his cronies from the sidewalk incident. They were deep in conversation and didn't notice Robert at first. Sorry we're late, Harold, Tyler was saying. The Vision Tech meeting ran long. These new AI applications for real estate assessment are going to... He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes fell on Robert. Confusion crossed his face, then dawning recognition, followed by disbelief. Is something wrong, Tyler? Wells asked, noticing the sudden tension. Tyler recovered quickly, his smooth corporate mask sliding back into place. Not at all. Please continue. Robert felt sweat beading on his forehead. He hadn't anticipated this particular complication. Linda shot him a questioning look, but he gave a small shake of his head. This wasn't the time to explain. Wells called the meeting to order. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to evaluate a new approach to urban housing development. Ms. Chen, the floor is yours. Linda stood and delivered a brief introduction, explaining how she'd come across Robert's work and why she believed it represented a breakthrough. She outlined the current challenges in affordable housing development, the failed attempts to solve them, and why Robert's approach was different. And now, she said, I'll let the architect himself explain his vision. Heart-pounding, Robert stood. He could feel Tyler's eyes boring into him, but he focused on the large screen where Linda had loaded digital versions of his drawings. For 3 years, Robert began, his voice steadier than he expected. I've been looking at housing from a fundamental perspective, not how we've always built, but how we could build if we started from scratch with today's materials and technologies. He clicked to the first detailed slide. This modular system uses a combination of prefabricated components and on-site assembly. The innovation is in how these pieces connect, without specialized tools or highly skilled labor. As Robert spoke, explaining each element of his design in clear, simple terms, he felt himself transforming back into the professional he once was. This room, these concepts, this was his world. He knew these problems inside and out, and more importantly, he knew how to solve them. He explained the cost savings, the environmental benefits, the scalability, and the adaptability to different climates and locations. He showed the mathematical models proving his designs could withstand earthquakes, hurricanes, and extreme temperature variations. Most importantly, Robert said, reaching the conclusion of his presentation, these homes can be built at 40% below current market rates while lasting twice as long as conventional construction. They're not just affordable to build, they're affordable to maintain. As Robert finished, the room fell silent. He looked around, trying to gauge reactions. Several executives were examining the printouts Linda had distributed, frowning in concentration. Others were making notes. Tyler Richardson's face was unreadable, a careful blank. Harold Wells leaned forward, steepling his fingers. These numbers, they're hard to believe, Mr. Davis. You're suggesting we could build quality housing at less than half what it's costing us now? Yes, Robert said simply. I am. An older woman near the end of the table spoke up. I've been in this industry 30 years. Everyone claims to have the solution, but when you dig into the details, there's always a catch. What's yours? No catch, Robert replied. Just a willingness to throw out conventional wisdom and start fresh. The problem, said another executive, isn't just technical. It's regulatory. Building codes, union requirements, supplier contracts, all accounted for. Robert interrupted, flipping to a slide he'd prepared addressing exactly these concerns. These designs exceed current codes by significant margins. As for the rest, that's where partners like Wells Development come in. You have the relationships and influence to navigate those waters. Wells was studying the detailed cost breakdowns. If these figures hold up in real-world conditions, they will, Robert assured him. The discussion continued, growing more technical as executives asked pointed questions about materials, timelines, scalability, and potential obstacles. Robert answered each one confidently, drawing on knowledge accumulated over decades in the field. and the intense research he'd done during his years on the street, reading architectural journals in the public library, and observing construction sites around the city. Throughout the exchange, Tyler Richardson remained silent, though his expression grew increasingly troubled. Finally, as the discussion wound down, he spoke. "This all sounds wonderful," Tyler said, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "But I have to question the source." He looked directly at Robert. "Where exactly did you work before this, Mr. Davis? Which firms? Which projects specifically were yours?" The room grew quiet. Robert felt the trap closing in. Linda jumped in. "Robert's background isn't relevant to the merit of these designs." "I disagree," Tyler cut her off. "Expertise and experience absolutely matter in evaluating credibility." Harold Wells frowned. "Tyler has a point, though his delivery could use work. Mr. Davis, would you mind sharing your professional background?" Robert looked around the room at these powerful people who held his future in their hands. He could lie, create a fictional career, or he could tell the truth and watch his opportunity crumble. He chose truth. "Until 3 years ago, I was a senior architect at Brennan & Associates. Before that, Martin Weber Group for 12 years. My designs include the Westfield Commons residential complex, the Lakeview Apartments renovation, and the eastern wing of City Hospital." Wells nodded, impressed. "Solid credentials. So why haven't you been working recently?" Robert took a deep breath. "Because for the past 3 years I've been homeless." A murmur ran through the room. Several executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "The economic crash, medical bills, divorce, a perfect storm that cost me everything." Robert continued quietly. "Except my mind and my training. Those I kept, and I used them to solve problems I was living with every day." He looked directly at Tyler. "In fact, Mr. Richardson and I have met before, just not in a boardroom." Tyler's face flushed red. Wells looked between them, confused. "You two know each other?" "We've crossed paths," Robert said evenly. "Mr. Richardson and his colleagues have seen me many times outside Horizon Tower. They've made their opinions of me quite clear." Tyler stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You're telling me this man," he pointed accusingly at Robert, "is the same homeless person who begs outside our building? And we're supposed to take his design seriously?" "Sit down, Tyler," Wells said, his voice quiet but firm. He turned to Robert, studying him with new interest. "Is this true?" "Every word," Robert replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Wells was silent for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be damned." He looked around the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we just found exactly the perspective we've been missing." The conference room erupted into chaos after Robert's revelation. Some executives were visibly uncomfortable, others curious, and a few seemed outright impressed. Tyler Richardson's face had turned a dangerous shade of red as he stood rigid by his chair. "This is a joke," Tyler insisted, looking to his colleagues for support. "We're seriously considering taking advice from someone who has nothing left to lose." Harold Wells interrupted, his voice calm but authoritative. "Someone who's experienced the very problems we're trying to solve from the inside." He turned to Robert. "That's a perspective worth its weight in gold in this industry," Tyler scoffed. "With all due respect, Harold, this is a business decision, not a charity case." Wells's eyebrows shot up. "Do I look like a man who makes charity cases out of business decisions, Tyler?" "I've built this company on recognizing opportunity where others see nothing." He tapped Robert's design spread across the table. "And these are a hell of an opportunity." The older woman who had questioned Robert earlier spoke up. "I'm with Harold. I've seen hundreds of housing proposals over the years. Most are minor variations on the same tired ideas." She held up one of Robert's sketches. "This is genuinely different. And the math checks out." Tyler looked around the room, realizing he was losing ground. "Fine, run the numbers, test the concepts. But we need due diligence before committing to anything." "Naturally," Wells agreed. "We'll have our teams verify everything." He turned to Robert. "Assuming your designs hold up under scrutiny, and I believe they will, what would you want out of this partnership?" Robert hadn't thought that far ahead. 2 days ago, he'd been sitting on the sidewalk being mocked by the very people now considering his ideas. The sudden possibility of change left him momentarily speechless. Linda jumped in smoothly. Standard architectural licensing fees, consulting rights on implementation, and a position overseeing the pilot project. She glanced at Robert. "Does that sound reasonable?" Robert nodded, grateful for her guidance. Yes, what matters most to me is seeing these designs become real homes for people who need them. Wells smiled. Admirable, but talent deserves compensation. He looked thoughtful. How about this? We create a new division focused specifically on affordable housing innovation. You head it up. Full executive position, salary, benefits, the works. The room went silent. Robert stared at Wells, certain he'd misheard. You want me to work for you? As an executive? I want you to lead a team that will revolutionize how we build housing, Wells corrected. Based on what I've seen today, you're uniquely qualified. He glanced at the still fuming Tyler. Sometimes the best talent comes from unexpected places. One of the other executives raised a practical concern. Harold, while I'm impressed with the designs, there are considerations. Mr. Davis has been homeless for years. No permanent address, no bank accounts, possibly credit issues. All easily solved problems. Wells waved away the concern. We have company apartments for visiting executives. Mr. Davis can use one until he gets settled. He looked at Robert. That is, if you're interested in the offer. Robert felt dizzy with the sudden turn of events. Yes, I'm interested. Good, Wells said decisively. Linda, since you discovered our new executive, I'd like you to work with him. You two clearly make a good team. He turned to the rest of the group. Meeting adjourned. I want full analysis of these designs on my desk by Friday. As people gathered their things, Tyler approached Wells, speaking in a low, urgent tone. Wells listened briefly, then shook his head. Decisions made, Tyler. Either get on board or get out of the way. Tyler's face hardened. He shot one last venomous look at Robert before storming out, his cronies trailing behind. After the others had filed out, only Robert, Linda, and Wells remained in the conference room. That went well, Linda said, a hint of wonder in her voice. Better than we could have hoped, Wells agreed. He studied Robert. You don't seem as happy as I'd expect for someone who just went from homeless to executive in under an hour. Robert struggled to find the words. It's just overwhelming. Yesterday I was invisible. Today people are listening to me again. Wells nodded thoughtfully. Life can change in an instant, for better or worse. You've experienced both extremes now. He patted Robert's shoulder. My driver will take you to the company apartment. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start building your team. After Wells left, Linda let out a shaky laugh. I can't believe it worked. When I saw that awful Tyler person walk in, I thought we were finished. So did I, Robert admitted. But maybe it was for the best. Everything's out in the open now. They rode the elevator down in companionable silence, both processing the extraordinary events of the afternoon. In the lobby, a sleek black car was waiting to take Robert to his new temporary home. Before getting in, Robert turned to Linda. Thank you. For seeing me when no one else did, she smiled. Just doing my job, finding innovative solutions to impossible problems. Well, your solution changed my life, Robert said simply. As the car pulled away, Robert watched the city streets through the window, the same streets he'd slept on, the same buildings he'd sheltered beside. Everything looked different now, filled with possibility rather than despair. The company apartment was in a luxury high-rise downtown. The doorman greeted Robert with respectful deference, clearly informed of his status as a Wells executive. The apartment itself was larger than any place Robert had ever lived. 2 bedrooms, gleaming kitchen, plush furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Robert stood in the center of the living room, overwhelmed. After 3 years of having nowhere to call his own, the space felt impossibly vast. He set down the small bag containing his few possessions, the clothes Linda had bought him, his precious original drawings, and a worn photo of his mother he'd managed to hold on to through everything. In the bathroom, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The haircut and new clothes had transformed his outer appearance, but his eyes still held the wariness of someone who had known hardship. Would that ever go away? Did he want it to? That night, despite the comfortable bed, Robert couldn't sleep. He sat by the window instead, watching the city lights and sketching refinements to his designs until dawn broke over the skyline. The next 6 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. Robert's designs were thoroughly tested, verified, and ultimately approved for a pilot project, a small community of 30 housing units on a piece of land Wells Development owned on the city's east side. Robert assembled a team of young, idealistic architects and engineers who were excited to work on something meaningful. Linda became his right-hand person, her practical knowledge of urban development complementing his innovative design approach. The groundbreaking ceremony attracted considerable media attention. "From homeless to housing hero," read one headline. Robert found himself thrust reluctantly into the spotlight, a symbol of both innovation and second chances. Through it all, Tyler Richardson continued his campaign of subtle sabotage. He questioned Robert's decisions in meetings, challenged his budget allocations, and tried to redirect resources away from the affordable housing division. But with Wells's firm backing, Robert's project moved forward despite the obstacles. As the first buildings began to take shape, rising from the ground in record time thanks to the modular construction method, Robert felt a sense of validation he'd never experienced before. These weren't just lines on paper anymore. They were becoming homes where people would live. Families would grow and communities would form. On a crisp fall afternoon, exactly 1 year after his life-changing meeting with Wells, Robert stood on the nearly completed project site. The first residents would move in within weeks. Behind him, a reporter and camera crew were setting up for an interview about the revolutionary housing approach that was already attracting attention from cities across the country. As Robert waited for the interview to begin, he noticed a familiar figure approaching from the parking lot, Tyler Richardson, walking with purposeful strides toward him. Robert tensed, unsure what to expect. They hadn't spoken directly since that fateful meeting a year ago. "Mr. Davis," Tyler said, his voice formal but lacking its usual contempt. "Do you have a moment?" Robert nodded cautiously. Tyler looked around at the nearly finished homes. "I have to admit I didn't think this would work." He gestured at the buildings. "But the numbers don't lie. Construction costs came in under budget. Energy efficiency exceeds projections." "Yes," Robert agreed, surprised by Tyler's apparent change of heart. "We've already had inquiries from 3 other cities wanting to license the design." Tyler nodded, looking uncomfortable. "The board is impressed. They're considering expanding your division's budget for next year." He hesitated, then added reluctantly, "My father says it's the most innovative thing Wells Development has done in a decade." Robert raised an eyebrow. "High praise." "Look," Tyler said, lowering his voice, "I was wrong about you. I judged you based on circumstances, not abilities. That was my mistake." It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Tyler, it was remarkable nonetheless. "We all make judgments," Robert said evenly. "What matters is being willing to revise them when faced with new information." Tyler extended his hand. "Wells Development is stronger with you on the team. I'd like us to find a way to work together going forward." Robert looked at the offered hand, thinking of all the times Tyler had walked past him on the street, all the mockery and disdain. Then he looked at the homes around them, homes that would change lives, homes that existed because someone had finally seen past his circumstances to his potential. He took Tyler's hand and shook it firmly. "I'd like that too," Robert said, meaning it. After all, we're in the business of building things, not tearing them down. 2 years after that first groundbreaking ceremony, Robert stood before a crowd of hundreds. Behind him stretched not just 30 homes, but an entire community. 250 housing units, a community center, shared gardens, playgrounds, and small businesses. What had started as a pilot project had grown into something much bigger. Hope Village, the first of its kind in the country. "Today isn't just about cutting a ribbon," Robert told the gathered crowd, which included city officials, business leaders, and most importantly, the families who would soon move in. "It's about cutting through old ways of thinking, about seeing possibilities where others saw problems." From his spot on the stage, Robert could see Linda in the front row, smiling proudly. Beside her sat Harold Wells, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever. Even Tyler Richardson was there, no longer an adversary but a somewhat reluctant ally who had eventually recognized the business potential in Robert's innovations. But the faces that meant the most to Robert were the ones he didn't know, the future residents, people who had struggled with housing insecurity, just as he once had, people who would soon have keys to homes they could actually afford. 3 years ago I was homeless, Robert continued, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. I slept in shelters when I could, on the streets when I couldn't. I was invisible to most people, just another problem they hurried past. A hush fell over the crowd. This wasn't news. Robert's story had been widely covered in the media, but hearing it from him directly still had power. But even when I had nothing, I still had my mind. I still had my training. I still had the ability to look at problems differently. And that's what Hope Village represents. A different way of looking at problems we've accepted for too long as unsolvable. Robert gestured to the buildings behind him. These homes cost 40% less to build than traditional housing. They use 60% less energy to heat and cool. They'll last twice as long with half the maintenance. Those aren't just numbers. They're the difference between a home being affordable or out of reach for working families. The crowd applauded, and Robert waited for the sound to die down before continuing. But Hope Village isn't the end of our work. It's just the beginning. He nodded to Harold Wells, who stood and joined him at the podium. Today, Wells announced, Wells Development is proud to launch the Davis Foundation for Housing Innovation with an initial endowment of $50 million. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the audience. This foundation, Wells continued, will fund similar projects in cities across the country, train the next generation of architects and builders in these new methods, and continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in affordable housing. He turned to Robert, and it will be led by the man whose vision made all this possible, Robert Davis. The crowd erupted in applause. Robert, overwhelmed, shook Wells' hand as cameras flashed around them. After the ceremony, as people toured the new homes and enjoyed the celebration, Robert slipped away to a quiet corner of the community garden. He needed a moment to process everything that had happened. A small plaque caught his eye, newly installed beside a bench. It read, "In memory of Grace Davis, who taught her son that everyone deserves a place to call home." Robert touched the plaque gently. His mother hadn't lived to see his success, but he liked to think she would be proud, not of the money or the recognition, but of the lives that would be changed. "There you are," Linda said, finding him in his moment of reflection. "Everyone's looking for you. The mayor wants photos." Robert smiled. "Just needed a minute." Linda sat beside him on the bench. Over the past 2 years, they'd become more than colleagues. Their friendship had deepened into something more, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared vision. "Quite a journey from that rainy day when I found you sketching," she said, taking his hand. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," Robert admitted. "I wake up expecting to be back on that sidewalk. But you're not," Linda reminded him. "You're here, and you've changed things for the better." Robert nodded toward the new homes where families were already exploring what would soon be their living rooms and kitchens. "We've changed things," he corrected. "I wouldn't be here without you seeing something in me worth believing in." Linda squeezed his hand. "I saw talent being wasted. The real hero of this story is you, for not giving up, for keeping your mind sharp even when everything else was falling apart." A commotion near the community center caught their attention. A group of children had discovered the playground, their laughter ringing out as they climbed and slid and swung, already making the space their own. "That's the sound of success," Robert said, smiling at the children's joy. An older woman approached them, hesitant but determined. Robert recognized her as one of the future residents, a grandmother raising 3 grandchildren on her own after their mother's death. "Mr. Davis," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. We've been living in one room at my sister's place for 2 years. The kids have never had space of their own." Her eyes welled with tears. "You've given us a chance to be a family again, properly." Robert stood and shook her hand. "That's all I wanted to do, ma'am. Give people a chance." After the woman left, Linda nudged Robert playfully. "Ready to go back to the party, Mr. Bigshot Foundation Director?" Robert laughed. "I still can't believe Wells named it after me. There are plenty of other people who deserve the recognition." "It was your vision," Linda pointed out, "and your story that inspired people. Never underestimate the power of a good story to change minds." As they walked back toward the celebration, Robert spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Mrs. Lynn, the kind coffee shop worker who used to slip him sandwiches when he was homeless. He'd tracked her down after getting back on his feet, and she'd been one of his most enthusiastic supporters. "Mrs. Lynn," he called, waving her over. "Did you see the community cafe space? I designed it with you in mind." The older woman beamed. I saw it. Perfect spot for my nephew to open that bakery he's been dreaming about. It's yours if he wants it, Robert told her. 6 months rent-free to get established. Mrs. Lynn's eyes widened. You'd do that? You fed me when I was hungry, Robert said simply. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but I can try. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone and the sun was setting over Hope Village, Robert and Linda walked through the empty streets that would soon be filled with life. What's next? Linda asked. Now that this is finished and the foundation is launching? Robert looked thoughtful. I've been thinking about that shelter on Pine Street, the one where I used to stay. It's overcrowded, falling apart. With what we've learned here, we could create something better. Always looking for the next project, Linda said with affection. Do you ever stop to enjoy your success? Robert paused, looking around at what they'd built together. This is how I enjoy it, by using it to do more. There are still people out there like I was, with talents and gifts the world isn't seeing because they're too busy struggling to survive. They reached the edge of the property where a stone marker displayed the Hope Village name and motto. Everyone deserves a place to call home. You know, Linda said, when I found you that day in the rain, I was just looking for a way to prove those rich investors wrong. I never imagined it would turn into all this. Robert smiled. Life's funny that way. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. He looked back at the community they'd built. I was invisible for 3 years. Now I see invisible people everywhere, not just the homeless. But anyone whose potential is being wasted because society has decided they don't matter. And you want to make them all visible, Linda said, understanding in her voice. As many as I can, Robert agreed, starting with the ones who sleep in shelters and dream of better days. The lights of Hope Village began coming on as dusk deepened, each one representing a family that would soon have a new beginning. Robert took Linda's hand as they watched the community light up against the darkening sky. Not bad for a homeless guy who used to get laughed at by billionaires, he said, quietly. Linda leaned her head against his shoulder. They're not laughing anymore, and indeed they weren't. They were listening, learning, and investing in his vision. The man they once mocked had become the man they now followed. As stars appeared overhead, Robert made a silent promise to himself and to all those still struggling on the streets. This was just the beginning. The true measure of his success wouldn't be in buildings constructed or awards received, but in lives transformed, including his own. From invisible to influential, from dismissed to distinguished, Robert's journey had come full circle, but the road stretched out before him still, with more challenges to overcome and more people to help. And he was ready for every step of that journey.